Before I crack into this video, just so you know, these patchy uploads are not the new norm. Stuff just keeps happening recently, and I'll be back to daily uploads as soon as possible. Yesterday, the Institute of Physics published a sort of guide or report on best practices for schools to fight gender stereotyping. It's called Opening Doors, and the project was co-funded by the Institute of Physics and the Government Equalities Office. However, in spite of this government backing and the fact that the GEO works with the Department for Education, following these guidelines has not been made mandatory, so I can't imagine teachers giving too much of a shit about this. That said, this does look geared up to be an ongoing project, and this report may turn out to be one of the early roots of future legislation, so I think it's worth looking at. As I'm sure you'd expect from anything produced with the help of gender experts, there is some goofy sounding shit in here, including the suggestion that schools appoint senior gender champions. I think I've killed a few of those in Diablo 3. They drop unisex loot, such as the Equalis staff. The name is purple, it must be pretty rare, and it may only be granted to teachers who, for example, challenge stereotypical views regarding Romeo and Juliet. Returning to seriousness, there are tons of weird little tidbits in this guide, like encouraging teachers to talk to parents about gendered aspirations. But for this video, I'm going to focus on the two main things that stood out to me. First, we're going to look at guidelines regarding speech, essential feature of good practice in countering gender stereotyping in schools. Number 3. Sexist language. Sexist language is treated as being just as unacceptable as racist and homophobic language. Teachers receive training on unconscious bias and equality and diversity awareness. What is sexist language? They say it should be taken as seriously as racist or homophobic language, so I guess like bullying a gay person and calling them a faggot. But looking through this report, they don't seem to provide a single example of what is definitely sexist language. In fact, they seem to encourage it to be vague. Later, in their elaboration on the topic of sexist language, they referred to students being sensitive to casual comments made by teachers which, while not consciously sexist, often reinforced gender prejudices. So part of what they want to be considered unacceptable and clamped down on is teachers accidentally, without conscious effort, saying things that could possibly be construed as reinforcing sexist prejudice. In the eyes of students, of course, who are going to be told that they need to keep an eye out for this. If these guidelines ever become mandatory, teachers' suicides will skyrocket. There is one more thing I have to show you regarding their guidelines on sexist language. They have provided an activity to help students, parents, and teachers discover what is acceptable or unacceptable to say. It's called OK and Not OK. The idea being you collect phrases you've overheard at school and then arrange them into columns, OK and Not OK. The report claims the teachers who completed this activity were often surprised by the hidden meanings of phrases used by students, and also by the unintended consequences of language used by their colleagues. Underneath, they provide examples of comments overheard in schools, but they don't clarify if these are all not okay, or if this is just a mixture of things you should consider okay or not okay. I presume the one that says, in terms of jobs, you could be a nurse, teacher, work in retail or law, women do all sorts of things, is what they'd consider an example of unacceptable sexist language. And I guess man up would be one of the ones they'd say is not okay toward boys. But where I lose track of what I think they might be trying to do is when they include things like facts. Girls' attainment at GCSE is better than that of boys. Male students are outnumbered by female students at most universities. Why would these even have to be considered? Are they not true? Elsewhere in the report, on the topic of what they call subject equity, they suggest that teachers should never comment on which subject they personally find harder. This is because if students hear that a teacher finds, say, maths harder, girls might hear that, think maths is hard, and not pursue it. Which more or less brings us to the other main thing I got out of this report. They are really trying hard to cut the individual out of their equation. The problem they see is gender imbalance in subject choice and boys underperforming in general. They see the cause as being school culture, subtly sexist language, timetable layouts that encourage gender stereotypical clusters of subjects to be picked, attitudes of their peers, and they see the solution as removing anything that could possibly influence a kid like that. Assuming what they're saying about school culture is correct, I find it very strange that looking through this guide, I cannot find mention of concern about children lacking individualistic attitudes. In fact, bizarrely, they seem to be concerned that children in schools are being treated too much like individuals. Here's what they say about equality of opportunity in the schools they observed. In many of the schools visited, there was confusion about what it means to have equality of opportunity. Many teachers expressed the view that because they treated all students in the same manner, they could not be discriminating between boys and girls. A related point in some schools was that, while they placed a laudable emphasis on treating each student as an individual, they sometimes lost sight of group behavior that was impinging strongly on the behavior of individuals. In staff training, ensure that everyone understands the difference between removing gender bias and treating all students in the same way. So I guess this is a can't stay neutral on a moving train kind of thing. While it is certainly good practice to treat each student as an individual, those giving advice and support should be aware of group pressures that can affect individuals. I've sifted through it again, and this really is the only bit I can find where they talk about treating people as individuals, and it's basically saying, yeah, that's good, but you do it too much. I'm sure all of the stuff they talk about in this report has some kind of effect, and if everything they're saying is true, for example, they're saying kids are aware of this stuff and they feel like they're being dragged along, then yeah, I agree, there is a cultural issue, but the issue isn't gender stereotyping, it's not subtle language use. If what this guide describes really is what screws up kids' grades and forces them on paths they don't want, then the real issue is much larger. It's a lack of belief in one's own ability to choose, and if followed, these guidelines will only reinforce that attitude if it's there, or instill it if it isn't. If everything they've said is right, the solution doesn't solve anything. It just means kids will be able to slide through school without ever facing their lack of self-determination, ending up as wrecks, but qualified wrecks that need safe spaces to survive. This isn't about empowering people to make their own choices, it's about increasing the odds that they'll take a path that gives you the numbers you want at the end. There is a difference. But, as usual, that's just another one of my harmful opinions. I was thumbing through the guide one last time and I caught something I missed. There is a little bit more guidance on speech than I thought there was. Training teachers on diversity. In the visited schools, a number of staff had observed casual sexism in class. For example, catcalling, sexist jokes, derogatory language. I thought it was strange that I hadn't seen jokes included as part of the problem yet.